Welcome to another exciting episode of Purpose on Purpose, Overcoming Adversity and Creating Resiliency. I'm your host, Dario Herrera, with my co-host, Christy Grease. And today we have an extraordinary guest and someone who has had an impact on my life beyond I could ever imagine. Someone who's been a friend, a mentor, a leader, a teacher, and really a huge part of my emotional growth. And I'm so grateful to have Amy Ayoub on with us as our first guest on Purpose on Purpose.
You forgot to say I was the president of your fan club too.
Yes. The only member too.
We've got another one here with
Hey,
us.
I'm on there too. I'm a member.
Co-president.
Welcome, Amy.
Thank you so much.
Amy, last week we talked a lot about some of the formulaic parts of overcoming adversity and developing resiliency. And, you know, as I've experienced you and seeing your arc of development, both personal and professional. I mean, when we first met, you were a financial consultant and doing volunteer fundraising for political candidates. You became then a full-time political consultant, fundraising. And I would argue probably the top political consultant fundraiser in the country. And you transitioned from that to being a speaking coach and arguably one of the best speaking coaches with a unique approach. And in between that, you had some incredible things happen too, right? You were the first woman appointed to the Nevada Athletic Commission, and you've had a documentary on your life, you know, the Zen speaker, Breaking the Silence. And I wonder, have you faced any adversity along the way?
It's been easy sailing. Yeah, I have. And, you know, for a long time, I always considered that the adversity that I brought on myself. I took on blame from the time I can remember. I took on that blame on myself and self-sabotage. And there definitely has been that. But it's not about finding blame or anything, but it is recognizing that that the blaming game is not going to help you get through anything. It certainly isn't going to lead to a happy, joyful life. So it's been a long, slow journey. I'm hoping that listeners will be quicker learners than I was. It took me a little while, but you know, there's been benchmarks along the way that I've overcome different challenges in my life and still faced another and another. And like I said, some of those were brought on by myself, but others weren't. And we tend, as I talk to other people, you included, tend to take on other people's guilt and shame that just doesn't belong to us at all. People have unfortunately done really horrible things to other people along the way. You know, you'll hear victims of crime, you'll hear victims of rape blaming themselves. They shouldn't have been out at night or whatever it is. It's like, no, some violent person violated you. And yet there's something about the human nature that we take that on ourselves. So the adversity that we all experience it sometimes, we need to look at it and identify what caused it. Again, not to blame, but to be able to resolve it. And it's a different way to resolve it if we did bring it on ourselves compared to if somebody else brought it to us.
That's such a good distinction. It's something we talked about last week. And, you know, Christy has experienced a ton of adversity in her life, primarily from external, you know, being bullied in high school, for example, right? She didn't do anything to bring that upon herself, you know, and then we contrasted that with some of my adversity, some of it self-created, right? Definitely I had no control over how my stepfather treated me or my mom walking out, but I did have control as an adult when I made choices that, you know, weren't becoming, weren't filled with integrity and, you know, weren't honoring the responsibilities I was given by the folks who put me in a place of responsibility. Right. So how do you deal with
for a minute that when you were saying that, what I was thinking was even those things that we say we brought on ourselves were the results of some of the treatment that we experienced. Right. we were doing things that weren't respecting ourselves. In my case, drugs and alcohol, or so many things. But for one instance, but that it's so I can say I brought that on myself. I didn't have to. It's an illness. My father was alcoholic. I mean, there's so many other parts to it. Low self-worth, being vulnerable to the first man that pays attention to me, or any man that pays attention to me, was because I had been abandoned and was looking for that male love, right? That attention. So, and you also, the same thing. You suffered really sad, horrible incidents in your childhood. And so, yes, maybe, we can look back and say it was a choice, but it was a choice based on how somebody else treated us when we weren't able to make our own choices. So I think we need, first of all, to learn to be gentle on ourselves. And again, I just want to reiterate, it's not about finding blame or something. It's just, We're not going to get better if we keep beating ourselves up. Just not.
Yeah. One of the things that we're working towards in this show as we have conversations is really identifying the parts that lead individuals, whether it's self-imposed or not, whether how you got to the adversity or not, the parts of converting that adversity into resilience, right? And one of the things we identified last week was surrounding yourself with a tribe that loves you, that really loves you, right? That supports you, accepts you, it's unconditional, a lot like our friendship has been over the years. It hasn't been without me disappointing you or you getting angry at me for disappointing you or whatever. but it's been unconditional, and I've loved you unconditionally, and I've received that love from you. So tribe is an important part of that, right? Accepting responsibility for the adversity, whether it's your fault or not, owning it, right? Your part in it, and understanding the source of it, so that when you know better, you do better, to quote Maya, right? So what would you say then is this conversation of whether it's self-imposed or not, what would you say if we could pull out a formula or like a part to make it part of a formula of converting adversity into resilience? How would you categorize that?
Well, one of the things you mentioned, I think is the most important, is taking responsibility in the way that, again, isn't blame. It's saying, I'm in control. I have choices. And we didn't always have those healthy choices. We weren't coming from that place. But now we can choose to make better choices. And a lot of people will say, well, that's blaming yourself, is taking responsibility. And some of us go back as far as saying that we chose the parents that we were born into the family to learn these lessons, right? That's something I personally believe, right? Yeah. And people go, oh no, that's not, I don't believe that. Okay, you don't, but I do. And that one belief freed me to be able to better myself and be open to other, to getting a tribe around me, to doing all these other things. But I couldn't do any of that without saying, I'm totally responsible for everything that happens to me. Again, that's not a negative sentence to me. It's a free, positive sentence to me. And even, every day, probably at one time, I'm sure not 2 days go by that I don't have to remind myself of that when I get into my food, so sad, I need more business, whatever it is. It's like, I'm in control. What do I do? Right? I could choose to do something different. And it is very freeing. So I think that one, I don't know that there's a cookie cutter that you can say, do this, and you'll be resilient.
Right.
There are certain, the ones that you mentioned definitely are important. And before you have a tribe, because, there's a big trust issue for those of us who have suffered trauma, right? Whether it's from our family or from relationships or whatever. There's usually a really significant trust issue. So to say all of a sudden we're going to have a tribe, that didn't happen. That's even when you talk about our relationship, disappointments or whatever you want to call it, we tested each other, right? There was a no trust. There was of course he did that because he's a man and that's what they do. Or for you, the opposite with women, right? In any kind of friendship or anything, there was that trust. We didn't trust ourselves. We certainly didn't trust other people. So I would just say, before you get that tribe, too, to have a safe tribe, which is positive books, which is meditation, which is any kind of film or anything that you can find that's positive, then that's your tribe, until you can connect with somebody else that, all of a sudden you're hearing other people that are reading those same books and watching those same movies and listening to that same podcast. And you'll see that then you have a real person that's your tribe. So,
I couldn't agree with you more. What's coming up for me is a few things that you said. But the one thing that I keep thinking is, I'm thinking about shame. And is shame and blame, are they cousins? Or are they mother-daughter? Like, what's the relationship between shame and blame? Because I really believe in what Brene Brown says, that shame lives in secrecy. And so a lot of what you're saying about taking ownership of the choices you made or the things that have happened in your life, when you do speak those out, it's empowering. And I think it creates this space that that miracles can happen, that healing can happen, where if you are in secrecy and you're blaming yourself without really taking ownership, there's not really that chance to overcome it. I also think about the fact that it's really important that we have people in our lives that have earned the right to hear our stories. And like you said, it may start with befriending yourself. When I think about being bullied personally, I'm probably the biggest bully I've ever had in my life. I probably said the worst things to myself without realizing it. And taking the time in meditation and prayer and self-healing, self-help, that journey, I think you just then begin to attract those people because you're elevating your own, energetic field. And I think that that's amazing that you are able to kind of acknowledge that the things that have happened to you, but then empower yourself by owning it, even if it's something that you had no control of.
Right.
There's something in the process of taking accountability that empowers you.
Yeah. And I think part of this too is the stories we tell ourselves about how people will receive us if they actually knew the truth. Right.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And things that I historically haven't shared because I fear that they would think less of me than they did already, or that they couldn't possibly accept me or love me, because if they only knew, right? If they only knew. And I bring this up specifically, Amy, because you did one of the bravest things I've ever seen in my entire life. And when you testified before the legislature on a sex trafficking bill, and you sat there in front of people that you had raised money for, and people who knew you as this icon in Las Vegas, this legend in Las Vegas, and you shared some pretty deep stuff with them. And I'd love to invite you to share what that experience was like, whatever you want to share about that, because I think the response you got was probably not the response you expected.
Thank goodness. There's so much said just now that I want to touch on. Chris, when you said with the blame and shame thing, guilt is when you say, I did something bad, and shame is when you say, I am bad. And so that's the difference between that. And it's a huge difference. And so we blame ourselves. And people like to buy into that. As long as we're blaming ourselves, those people that were, some of them that were guilty or some of them that were witness and didn't do anything, they're happy for us to take that blame, and they can be in denial. So it's a big difference, and it changes everything. It's one of the reasons we don't speak up. It's going to change all the dynamics around us. It's not just going to change us. It's going to change the safety of those people and the denial and avoidance that they've had too. So it's such a, it's easy from somebody on the outside that hasn't experienced to say, oh, it's not a big deal, or just say it. Oh, it's such a ripple effect, right? Because it's such our sickness is everybody around us is sickness also. yeah, that feeling of if they only knew, Dario, that I'd say that all the time when in the community, being active in this community, I would get awards or, be highlighted at a luncheon and every time it was that feeling of if they only knew. And when I was appointed to the Nevada State Athletic Commission, it's the most sought after board in Nevada to sit on. It's really known as the Boxing Commission. And, it was something that's all I wanted all my life. I was a boxing fan from the time I was a little girl, and it was a big deal. And because it was such a big deal is the only thing that kept me going and wanting it, because at the same time I was going for that and wanting that and hoping I got it, I was almost paralyzed with fear that my story would come out, then they would know, right? And because a lot of people in the boxing world knew me from that past life. That's when I was a teenager and young adult. And so I was terrified. It was international news because I was the first woman, and it was a big deal, and that did not come out. But every time I was in a meeting, every time I was in the paper, I lived every day with if they only knew, and if they find out, I'm done. I with Dario's help, built a wonderful fundraising business that I loved and was very successful at. And every day and every time I got a new client. I mean, I remember the first time Dario introduced me to a couple people that were going to be new clients. One was running for DA and one was running for sheriff. I thought, are you kidding? Like, are you serious right now? I was so nervous. If they found out, because even if you have a relationship with a candidate and they don't care, they know you as this adult that has done other things, the campaign team is not going to take the chance of a story being about, oh, the person asking for money, was in the world of prostitution. It wasn't going to happen. I was going to lose my whole career. Mm-hmm. I felt it every day. So, but, a series of things happened that it just got where I couldn't keep it in anymore. When I was diagnosed with breast cancer, I was lucky that they got it early, and it turned out to be a lumpectomy, not a mastectomy. I was very lucky, but it didn't matter. When I was diagnosed with it, you would think that they told me I had a day to live. I was devastated. I felt like when they went in there, they were going to find all this cancer because I was full of cancer, because I was this phony person and did all these things. It was horrible. And that's when I started writing some of the stories. Somebody that I reached out to suggested that I just start writing some of the stories. And that's when stories came up that were negative stories of that time, because I had lived this falsehood that it was my choice, it was my fault, and it was fine. And I even told funny stories of, you do have a life in that life. You have other friends and things. So funny things can happen. I held on to that, and anybody in my family or anything that knew me at that time, they only heard those things. So they go, hey, it's not for me, but she chose it. She had fun. It was her. It's what she wanted to do. And they just didn't know. I kept all the violence and all the pain away from them and away from me. And it was the first time as I started journaling about it that stories came up of, almost dying at the hands of a pimp, and almost dying at the hands of a buyer, how I felt about myself, all those things. And it still took a while. Then I read about a girl that was being trafficked who was killed by her pimp. And I connected with her so much, it felt like it was me. She was the same age. She, had been a runaway. Just there was so much that was the same. I felt like that's the other choice. That's the other thing that could have happened, Amy. That could have been you. And it's not, right? So what are you going to do about it? So that's when I knew I had to speak up. And yet it still took me a few years, because I thought, what am I supposed to do? Get a microphone and go out on Las Vegas Boulevard and say, you guys probably wondering, what my story, nobody cares. Like, where's the place? And it took a few years before just how everything falls into place. What we say are coincidences, but just my life in politics. I was I had done fundraising for our Attorney General, and even though it was years after that, I heard her out in the community talking about a bill that she wanted to bring forth that would introduce the terminology of sex trafficking and tighten up the laws against traffickers.
Mm-hmm.
And I can still feel the embarrassment that I felt listening to her. I'm thinking, no, I should be doing something. She's doing something. I'm not doing. It was horrible. And then the next year I was invited to speak at the school, which is a detention school, Caliente here in Nevada, that I had graduated from when I was 17. I was asked to speak there, and I decided that was going to be the place that I just touched on it. And I, it was a big process to make sure that you keep saying you want to hear my story. You don't know my story after I left there. Do you really want to hear my story? And they, when I finally told them, then they said, like 95% of the girls here, 12 to 18, have been trafficked. So that's the first place. It was still, even though it was 100 people or so, it was a safe place. There was no press. It was counselors and teachers and kids. And I didn't go into it much, but I definitely acknowledged it, touched on it. And that freed me enough to go to the Attorney General and say, I know about this bill and I want to help you. You tell me. And I told her my story, and she was wonderful. And I thought she was going to ask me to talk to a couple of the legislators that were against it. And instead she said, would you sit next to me and tell your story to the committee, the joint committee? And I just said yes before I thought about it. And then I did everything that I tell my students not to do to prepare for it. Right? I tell them.
You was your testimony?
2013.
Okay.
And I was petrified. I really was. And it was the first time that I thought I could lose my family. This might be just too much for them to get this public. And I thought.
Did they know the story, Amy? Did
Yes.
they know about it? Okay.
And but I thought that I was physically going to die if I didn't tell them. I really, the cancer before, I thought if I don't, that's going to happen again and something's going to happen. I can't, I'm going to implode. And it was almost not being able to function. Just the shame was overwhelming. And it's a false pride, but it's almost, when I saw that story of that girl, Nicole, that maybe if I spoke up, that wouldn't have happened to her, which is, it's like, that's really false pride.
I get it.
And I didn't want to have that feeling again either. And so I just, knew wrote out kind of the stories that I felt would be the ones that would explain and change the stereotype that they had, and that would touch on parts of the bill that were important. And then most of the time, it wasn't about preparing how to speak or how to deliver it or any of that. It was praying. It was bringing in every positive quote I had. Marianne Williamson's, sharing your light gives other people permission to share theirs. All that went with me. That's all I could do. And it was amazing. It was, after I shared it, I wasn't clear. It was kind of a blur. Looking at the people was kind of a blur. I realized I focused on a couple. Your friend Ruben, our friend Ruben Dario, and he was in. They were in chairs, and Ruben said he almost fell off his chair. I mean, it was such a shock to people that were ready to hear this bill and not. They thought I was there. You have to sign up. They knew I was testifying. They thought I was there because I was an advocate for this bill. They knew I was friends with Catherine. I'm a community activist, that I could just have read that story and been, interested in the subject. They had no idea that there was that personal story. And you have to stay in there while everybody else testifies with no phone or anything. So it was a couple hours after I spoke, I had any feedback. And it was so overwhelming, the love that I got. It was so opposite of what I feared. And the love, amazing. They were just literally there with their arms open, people wanting to hug me and people offering to use their office, and calls coming in. Senator Reid wanted, they said Senator Reid wants to see you, and he just said how proud he was, just everybody. And
yeah.
And my family, a couple of my family members watched it, and they didn't. I didn't even get an immediate thing. They just said they wanted it to be okay for my mother, who was older, right? They wanted to make sure, not that she watched it, but that she would have been all right with it. And they were. I found out later they were proud, but I think they were in such shock that it was done that way and everything, that I didn't hear directly from them right away, but I knew that they were okay and they were all right with me. And since then, and certainly through the documentary, they've been nothing but supportive and fabulous. My sister came out for the opening, things like that. And even my mother saw it, and it's resolved issues with us. She wasn't happy about it. She didn't want it to happen. She didn't want me to testify. She didn't want me to talk about it. And once she watched the film, she actually said she was sorry, which were the two words I've been waiting for 60 weeks to hear. Wow. And I didn't need it anymore, but I really needed to hear it. And it changed everything for us. It's unbelievable. So everything was, it was love, not hate. It was people embracing me, not turning away from me. It was healing instead of separation with my family. I watch it all the time in people, that in my friends like Dario and students in my classes, that will just be, take the chance of share. Brene Brown's quote, that one of the many that I love so much, is when shame is spoken, it loses its power.
Right.
And so to have a safe place, that's what I want, is to create that safe place for somebody to be able to speak their shame. They don't have to become advocates for something afterwards. They don't ever have to talk about it again. But if they'll get that out of the way, then they can be more of themselves in everyday situations.
So the film is the Zen Speaker Breaking the Silence. It's been widely recognized at film festivals across the country. It's been picked up by PBS. It's on Amazon. If someone wanted to experience that, Amy, because I think it's, whether you're interested in trafficking or not, I mean, the real message is that of shame, overcoming shame, and what you just said, and really bringing it to light. And the other thing too is, like, not everyone deserves to know your story either, right? And the power of being able to dictate when you share it and who you share it with, from a place of power and choice, is incredibly important too. And you chose to share it in the broadest, most visible way possible, not just at Caliente, not just in front of the legislature, but to lend yourself to this documentary that's been aired nationally and internationally. So I guess the first question is, where, if people want to experience it, where do they go? It's
on Amazon Prime. It's in the United States and the UK. It's not all over the world, but those two countries, you can get it on Amazon Prime. And I never thought that I would do a documentary. I didn't want to be filmed,
I know. Yes, we had these conversations.
I don't want to be on
Who cares? I still hear you saying, "Who cares?" Like, who wants to listen? Who cares? What does it matter? Who cares about me? I still remember those conversations very vividly.
Right. And people kept saying I should write a book after I testified. Everybody, you need to write a book. And I kept thinking, then I was putting that shame, like, oh, I'm supposed to write a book. I should write a book. And it just wasn't feeling right. And when Robin Greenspun approached me, she was just the right person. That, we talked about the importance of trust. There was just a trust there, and that her intentions were right. And what I said to her is, I have no intention or no desire to have a documentary done with stilettos clicking down a sidewalk, which is every trafficking feature, right? And she looked at me like I was crazy, like I was so far away from what she thought. And she said, this is about somebody that had this experience, but it's the woman you are now and what you're doing in your speaking coaching that I was attracted to to see all the things you're doing now. And so that's why I said yes. And she stayed true to it. That yes, definitely there's a big part of the movie is about the trafficking part, but it's about how it affected me and how, the law enforcement part of that, the shame part, the violence part, the family part, instead of just the look, this is how it looks, and this is, the stilettos on the sidewalk is the only way I could say. It's not that.
Yeah.
And as Robin and I, we're going through it, it became different things too from what we first started. I think it was going to be more about the family too, because the family was so interesting. My family has their own documentaries that deserve, right? So
yeah, we all
documentaries, right? My goodness.
Exactly. So it changed along the way, but what I started saying is it's about shame, and not that many people are going to have the experience I had, but they're going to have an experience I didn't have. And what we have in common is the shame that it created, is the trauma that we felt, is the aftermath of, how we have to pick up the pieces from that. Just getting out of that life is not the cure-all. I was still on drugs and, drinking. There was still a lot going on negatively in my life after I removed myself from that situation. So just picking up the pieces and how can we help the next person pick them up a little bit faster. I actually lost a track of where I was going there.
No, but I love it because it brings up the next question I want to ask you. And you've mentioned students, and you have a very unique way of teaching public speaking and how to communicate. And what you've done for me is shared with me the value of my story and the power of my story and how it can be used to inspire others, to forgive myself, right? To be willing to, look at myself in a different light than, I'm a bad person and no one gives a shit what I have to say because I did all these things when I was a kid or as an adult. I took bribes, I did this or I did that, and you changed that for me. I could always give a speech, right? But what you taught me was the value of owning my story and sharing my story to heal, right? And in transition, I guess as a result, is helping others heal too and providing hope and inspiration for others. But really, for me, it was about self-healing. And when I asked you that question, like, who gives a shit? And your answer was, everyone does, and most importantly, it's going to help you heal. And I'll never forget that. I asked you in the classroom, and I was struggling with an exercise we were doing, and I was having one of those woe is me moments and feeling sorry for myself and no one cares and I have nothing to say. And that was, when I already knew you were brilliant, but that's when I learned how brilliant of a teacher from a public speaking perspective you were. I mean, yes, you taught me the techniques, you taught me how to open with a powerful statement, but really what you taught me was that I have value and that value is worth sharing, with other people and overcoming shame in that process, so tell us a little bit about your public speaking coaching and what's different about what you do that other folks might not from that perspective.
I believe that a great public speaker is one that is authentic and that is conversational because they're authentic. They're not trying to be something. They're not choreographing their gestures. They're just being authentic. And you can't get there without, conquering that shame and getting through that shame. And, like you said, Christy, it's who, you don't have to tell everybody everything. Yeah. I'm fine with that. I seem to tell everybody everything, or not. But you don't have to do that. But to get it out, like I said, in a safe place. It might not be me. It might be your religious leader. It might be a therapist. It might be a trusted friend. But to get that out, and so I feel that my real goal is to get the person there through these classes, and then they can become this great public speaker. Then you can, it's not rocket science here. There's 7 or 8 things to do to be a great, techniques to be a great speaker. So anybody can learn that if they put the time and effort, but you can't be one without being authentic. You can't really be a great public speaker. And when you look at the people that you admire as a public speaker, I guarantee you just 9 times out of 10, if you meet them off stage, they'll be that same way. And so that's always my goal. And if a student never gets up and even does a practice speech, but they leave feeling empowered, then I feel that was a success. And I've had people that did. I had somebody come recently that came through years ago and said the confidence that came from that they hardly ever speak. They're just not in that position at work. It's not something they do. They're not up there, but that their whole life changed because they felt more confident and they could go for promotions and things like that. Mm-hmm. I just recently started articulating it a certain way because it came to me that I say it's a public speaking class, but it's a lot like a fire walk or a ropes course, right? You don't do a fire walk because you want to walk on fire every day, right? You don't do a fire walk because that's what you're going to do as a career. You do a fire walk to break through some fear, to conquer that fear. And that's what this class is. Like, let's break through doing a fear. And everybody so many people have that fear of public speaking, that they'll come for that reason. And hopefully they get more than that. They're breaking, because the fear is never about public speaking. The fear is what you talked about earlier, Christy, being our biggest bullies. We think people are going to judge us and criticize us because we're judging and criticizing ourselves.
Amen.
People are not driving across town, paying money to come to this luncheon to hear you, to make fun of you. They're coming to learn something. They're coming to hear something. That's our self-talk that brings that. That's where that comes from. The fear is that. So when we can break through that shame that is causing us to talk to ourselves like that, then we're halfway there.
Without giving away the documentary and the ending and the experience of it, if you were to distill down your reality, your truth that you shared, that really helped you break through and then created the documentary, what would that be?
First of all, I want to go back to when I said I lost track of what I said. That was where I was going, was what the documentary ended up being about, was that shame. And that shows after the documentary, whenever we did Q&A or a panel, people came up to me and said, I was raped and I've never told anybody. It was the first time I ever told anybody. I was a victim of incest, and this is the first time I've ever said that. It was, I think, one time somebody else had been trafficked. It was only one time that we had the same experience, but everybody had this shame story, and they came up, and I realized when it first happened, I mean, luckily I've been working on myself and on this a long time. So I was very aware of the fact that what Marianne Williamson, the quote that I carried with me into my testimony of, I told my story, I let my light shine, and it gave them permission to let theirs. It's a good storyteller, and it's a reason stories are so important in public speaking. That's what connects us. And when we're telling a story, it lets people relate to themselves, reflect on themselves. And that's what they really like. So they'll say, oh, that person's such a great storyteller. Yeah, and then when you get into it, it's like, oh, they were talking about when they were in 4th grade. And I remembered when I was in 4th grade, this and that happened, or got my first car. And the stories don't have to be the same. The experiences don't have to be the same. There's just some connection, being that age, being in a certain place. It connects us, and it makes us like co-authors of the story.
Like a permission slip to have your experience and to. And I don't know about you, but for me, when I share my story and then I'm able to help other people, there's so much healing that takes place in that.
Absolutely. Yeah. When people would say, even when they were asking me to speak, they'll say, it'll help so many people. Because I said, and when I spoke at Caliente with the kids, people said that, like, it'll help them. I thought I would love to say that that's why I'm going to do this, but I hope it helps somebody. But I'm absolutely doing this for myself because I'm going to die. I'm going to implode. And I did it for myself. And yes, it did help others. And every time I speak, I'm still doing it for myself. Yes, I want to help others. Yes, I know logically that it helps others, but I'm extremely aware and okay with the fact that that's healing for me. It's healing it, and it fills me up so I can give more.
Exactly.
So if someone wants to be coached by you on your unique process of coaching, where do they go, Amy?
I don't know if they want to now that I told the secret. I kind of
like I do.
You do learn techniques also. My website is Amy, AMY, at thezenspeaker.com. They can reach out, and I'm on social media under my name if they want to reach out.
Have you gone virtual with your teaching now?
Yes.
Or are you in? Okay.
Yeah, I'm virtual, and I'm starting a new class. My classes are always like 8 to 10 people, so that it can still get individual attention. And I'm starting one on April 9th, and then I also do individual coaching. And I'm going to start some 1 hour, maybe just 1 hour workshops or a couple hour workshops. And if I get lucky enough, I think I might do something with Dario pretty soon too, so they could get double trouble.
I'll be the blessed one there for sure. As I've always been in a relationship, Amy, let me ask you a question. The title of our podcast is Purpose on Purpose, right? And that means a certain thing to Christy, that means a certain thing to me, and they're very complementary. And I guess I'd love to hear, where do you find purpose these days?
I've thought about it a lot, and I've thought about it more recently with the name of your podcast, actually. But through some coaching I'm doing with somebody, it's come up quite a bit where he talks about not having one purpose. Everybody is looking for this purpose, right? And there's so many people that some people feel we found our purpose, but so many, they need money, they need this job, that's not their purpose. What's their purpose? And I really feel like our purpose is all the same. I feel that our purpose of being here is to love each other and connect with each other through that love. That's really what I think our purpose is. And I think that when we're unhappy, we're in a position that we can't do that, or it's not working for us to do that. You've heard stories of people who have jobs that we consider not the successful jobs, just everyday jobs, a janitor, garbage man, whatever. But there's those people in those jobs that I would hear students at school saying the janitor is the one that they would go to trust.
Yeah.
He's always showing love. He's helping people. He's happy when he's doing his job, right? And so we have these other people are judging something, or I could never be happy doing that. Well, then you're not going to be happy doing this either, right? If you choose, because he knows the purpose of life, whatever job that is, you can meet your purpose as long as you're being loving and connecting with people. First, I was going to say supporting each other, but it's not always help. You don't always have to do something physical or money-wise or anything like that. It's supporting. Love is supportive. Love is the most supportive thing. When I walked out of that legislative session, that was the purpose of me speaking, was to let, not only to feel the love, but to let those people who are not always very loving in that legislative building feel that love and give me that love, because we forget that too, about we want to be the givers of all that. I mean, Dario, that's something I've been proud of, even through all my craziness and challenges, that I know how to accept. I know how to ask for help. I'm okay with it. Much to Dario's chagrin, I ask a lot of help, but
me too.
Yeah. Since we're all Brene Brown followers too, she has something she says about that, and I'll paraphrase, but that if you're that person that says, oh, I don't like to ask for anything. No, I'm a giver. I like to give. I want to help. Oh, I'll never ask for anything. I don't like. If you're doing that, then you're actually judging that. right? If you're judging taking help, you're judging giving help, and you're not really doing it freely and lovingly.
And you're shutting doors that are miracles that can come in, that you're really telling the universe no.
Right.
Instead of inviting that in and giving the gift to somebody else to give.
Right.
I think that's such an important point.
Yeah.
So, we started the show with the premise that there is, a structure, if not a formula, for how to, overcome adversity and create resiliency. And I think, to paraphrase your answers, like there's not one way to get there. But what I'm hearing is sharing and connecting with others.
Yeah.
Is part of that formula, right? Is part of that process,
Yeah, that's true. I didn't look at it that way. It is. It's, if you look at the jobs that you mentioned that I had when I was in financial planning, I did that I was recruited into that not because I had any background or any business giving anybody financial advice. It's because I had the connections to get business for that company. And I did it to get out of, otherwise I would have been in a secretarial position probably forever, because I didn't have the academic background to do other things. And
you had the secret that you were covering too, that,
right.
was in your mind holding you back, right? Keeping you
Absolutely.
there.
I wasn't worth that. I was shocked when they recruited me, right? So it wasn't something that I could say I loved, because I wasn't good at it. I didn't really feel, I had all my baggage I was bringing with it. But I did know that I wouldn't lie to anybody. I did know I would make sure that people weren't conned out of any money, and that it was a legitimate business. So when I brought them to the other guys, the men that were running it at the time, that would advise them. So that was my purpose. My purpose was not to be a financial planner. My purpose was whatever I was doing to make sure that people got connected in a loving way and in a safe way, right? The fundraising, it wasn't about, boy, I love calling people and asking them for money, or making Mario sit down and make him call for money. Although I like that better. But it was because of the people, the connections. And again, I lasted in that business so long without people running when they saw me coming, because they knew why I was coming. I lasted because they knew that I wasn't going to ask them to give something that was against what I knew were their beliefs or their party affiliation or their interest, right? So it's always approaching people with that love. That was my purpose. Of course, what I'm doing now makes it, I don't have to work around the job. It's absolutely aligned to what everything in my life has led up to this, I think, right? I'm totally in heaven. That thing about you'll find what you love to do and you won't work a day in your life. Yeah, that's where I am now. But it is absolutely what you just said, is that connection. You need the connection. We saw this year how much we need connection.
Yeah. If your purpose today is to connect and to be loving, I would say you're meeting that purpose beautifully, Amy. No one connects, no one cares, no one loves their community, their neighbor, and now themselves, better than you. And I want to thank you for teaching me so much, right? And for those who are at home, you're getting a snippet of why she's so brilliant. But we'd need hours and hours and hours to uncover her brilliance and her beauty, both internal and external. And it's been such a experience to see you grow in every way. And to experience your resiliency, right? And to see it in action, every day. And to see how you went from a secretary to the first woman to be appointed to the athletic commission, to the top political fundraiser, top speaking coach, to serving as a federal appointee on human trafficking. It's nothing short of incredible. The arc has been incredible, and it's been challenging. The adversity you faced is greater. I know we all minimize to normalize, and we all say, oh, what happened to me wasn't as bad as what happened to this person. I know I've done that. I know you've done that. We've had those conversations. But what you've done in light of what you've experienced is a definition of resilience. And
Absolutely.
I want to say, as your friend and someone who admires you deeply, thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for being there. I've been lucky to have angels in my life. Sometimes I didn't always recognize them, especially when I was younger. But, you were one of the few people that knew my secret, that kept my secret, and that didn't judge me because of my secret, and have been the biggest cheerleader since it's not a secret anymore. So it means a lot. It reminds, every time we talk about the past, especially the fundraising times, it also reminds me of one of the biggest lessons I've learned through this is noticing people who are angry and having some grace, showing them some grace. Because I was so angry during those fundraising years, right, Dario? I mean, Dario had to, apologize for, like, it's okay, you don't have to deal with her, I'll deal with her. and yeah, I wasn't considered a team player. It was me and Dario, or me and this candidate. And my defense, my shield, so you didn't see through me and see my secret, was that anger. And I know it manifests in different ways. I think with you, Dario, it might have been what came off as an arrogance was your defense, right? And mine was anger. And so when I see that in other people now, it's, obviously I see myself like, no, it's not pretty. That's what that looked like. But I try and have grace with it too. So the lessons are constant. The lessons are constant. If you'll open yourself up, it's amazing, right? The freedom that comes with it, the love that comes with it, but also the constant learning, the constant awareness is pretty magical.
Well, what I hear you saying is that thing that almost broke you really made you. It allowed you to be the fullest and the biggest version of yourself, and really give your love and your light and your purpose to the world. And I think that's something that our audience, and I know I've learned personally, and I feel is something that I want to pass down to my kids, that we get to, all the parts of us, even the broken parts, even the sad parts, are valuable and are a gift to somebody else if we're willing to be vulnerable and authentic and share it. And I just thank you. I can't wait to watch your documentary and hear the full story and your truth.
Thank you.
Yeah, for those at home, just a reminder, the documentary is The Zen Speaker, Breaking the Silence. It can be found on Amazon Prime in the US. Amy can be emailed at amy@thezenspeaker.com for her speaking coaching, and her website is thezenspeaker.com. And I've been through her classes multiple times. I've been through her writing retreats. And the reason I can have these conversations is because of Amy. The reason I can ask these questions, the reasons I can look at myself honestly, the reasons I'm comfortable in my own skin have a huge, huge part because of the work she's done with me, not just in the techniques, but in helping me understand, my story and sharing this story in a place that's safe, in the place that it's going to be valued, right? And through that process, I learned to value myself. And that's what a gift, So if you're looking for that gift, Amy can certainly guide you in that path. And as always, if you have any comments, any questions, anything you want us to address, comment and share your thoughts with us, right? This is meant for you. This is to serve you, to connect with you, to put it in Amy's language, to connect to our purpose of loving. Right, and being loving and connecting. So, share your thoughts, ask your questions, give us your feedback, and we're here for you. And until next time, I'm Dario Herrera with Christy Grease. Thank you, Amy Ayoub, for being a wonderful human being and for all you do and for being our first guest.
Thank you. It's an honor.
Thanks, Amy.
Thank you.